Well, let's hope this is going to be fun, boys and girls. We're going to start this off, this training that we're going to teach you regarding debt and helping you understand these terms that are going to be used throughout your life, such as debtor and creditor. And I want to read you, first of all, a little poem, and it's called The Debtor Prisoner Song, and it's from 1738. A starving life all day we lead, no comfort here is found. At night we make a common bed upon the boarded ground, where fleas in troops and bugs in shoals into our bosoms creep, and death-watch spiders round ye walls disturb us in our sleep. Were Socrates alive and bound with us to lead his life, 'twould move his patience far beyond his crabbed scolding wife. Hard lodging and much harder fare would try the wisest sage, nay, even make a parson swear and curse this sinful age. Thus we insolvent debtors live, yet we may boldly say, worst villains often credit give than those that never pay. For wealthy knaves they can applause, cheat and ne'er be tried, but in contempt of human laws in coaches safely ride. Now the reason why I've chosen that particular poem is because it's as poignant and relevant today as it is and it was all that time ago. The fact of the matter is that the people who have created the monetary system have enslaved us all into believing that we are actually the debtors, and that the people who don't pay those debts were then obviously thrown into a debtor's prison. Now that became outlawed and the debt was considered civil. Now, as we've seen over the last few years, people have started to be criminalised for not paying debt. And it's very important that you as a generation learn the fact that you are actually the creditor. You are the creator of all things money-wise, and you are the creator of the credits. And as we go through this learning, I hope that you're going to be able to reveal to yourselves as we go along just how this system has been turned into a slavery system, and that we are hoping obviously that you're going to be able to break that mold by reserving your rights and by crediting a structure that is impossible for you to be indebted to. So just going back over that poem, the reason why it's so poignant for me especially, it speaks of something that we would imagine a very long time ago to be considered the norm. But before the coronavirus, obviously, we were walking past people in the streets who were victims of that branding, that title of debtor. They had had their rights of shelter removed from them because they hadn't paid their mortgage, for example, or because they couldn't afford to carry on paying any debt, so-called debt, that these corporations were imposing on them. Council tax obviously became a big issue, and currently at the moment, if you haven't paid your council tax, that can be considered as a criminal act. Now, there's not a lot of difference, therefore, between where we're at now and where we were in 1738. People living in, cardboard boxes on the street, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people living in tent cities all over the world. And the baseline, the reason why, is because it's never changed. The monetary system and the way that money is created and people are controlled by it has been in place for so very long now that people just accept it as normal and don't do anything about it. And we're hoping that by you being able to comprehend and be able to see for yourselves that it's not the way that it has to be just because it's been that way, and that you are actually the key to be able to open the door of the debtor's prison, which really only exists in people's minds. So by taking you through these steps, such as how money was created, the Bank of England was actually bought, a little bit of history for you now, was actually bought by the Rothschilds using tally sticks. And so I want you to just kind of address that, because we're going to be talking to you later on about how we do our transactions using rocks. Rocks, for example, have been used as a token gesture of money, going as far back as Spartans, as the Greek Spartans, which we're going to be researching and doing a little history project on as we go through this learning procedure. And the tally sticks were used by the king, and there were a certain amount of notches. Thank you, Tinker. There were a certain amount of notches. Tinker wants to come and get in the act. Put onto these sticks, and then let's say take a stick, and they would put a certain amount of notches around the sticks, and then the sticks were split in half. One half was kept by the king so that there was no counterfeiting or forgery, and the other half was put into circulation. So let's say you, oh dear, Tinker's having a bit of a fit. Oh dear, you need a tally stick. Does somebody say sticks? I'll excited. Oh dear. Oh dear. Oh dear. Little Tinker gets excited when you say sticks. There we are. Give you have a little stick. Have a stick in a minute. Is that better? Is that better? Oh, there we are. There we are. Sorry about that, boys and girls. You alright now? Okay. So we'll have to whisper the word stick. Okay. So the tally sticks were put into circulation, and they were then, obviously, if you worked hard enough to warrant a stick that's got 6 notches on it, then you would be able to trade that stick for a pig. And then the stick would be taken back to the king, and the relevant amount of gold or whatever the value of the stick was given for those 6 notches. They decided collectively how many pieces of gold or silver or whatever it was that they wanted to trade was given to those particular amounts of notches in those sticks. So along came the Rothschilds. Now the Rothschilds were the original moneylenders of Venice. And just to give you a short history, you'll hear the stories probably out of the Bible of where Jesus went and whipped the bankers because of their money lending tactics, causing misery throughout the ages based on people's belief. And they went and created this money lending process, which would have incorporated terrible acts, in fact, if you didn't pay these money lenders back. And without going into too many gory details or scaring you from the off, we need to think about where the word pound comes from. And unfortunately, it comes from a terrible activity that used to take place through the removal of a pound of somebody's actual flesh if they were not keeping up with their payments back to these moneylenders. The Moneylenders, known as the Rothschilds, used to bear the red cross above their door, and they were known as the Rothschilds. Rothschild in German means red shield, and it became the emblem of the St. George's Cross, in fact, and also for the Red Cross that we see going and supposedly giving medical assistance in war-torn areas. Now, we need to look at how a country becomes a war-torn country. Who is it and what is it and where does the money come from, which creates war? And it actually comes from us. By us using the legal fiction, the name that we think is ours, we are actually crediting this system of debt slavery by using that name. So the people who are hosting this seminar for you have been asked to bring with them a copy of a birth certificate. Now, if they can get the birth certificate out, and if you can have a close look at that, and you may have seen this, you may have one yourself, most people have, and at the bottom it's got Crown copyright on there. It's a little C with a circle around it. You've probably seen it many times on Disney films and Nike, things like that. Now, that little C symbol there means that nobody is allowed to use that without a license. So imagine now, imagine the BBC putting on a film that was created by Disney, and they hadn't asked Disney the permission to do that, and they hadn't been given the rights because they hadn't bought the license to show that picture. So the rights of the creator of that film, for example, would be considered to have been infringed. Now, these are words that we want you to go away and research and study, so that you've got a very clear comprehension. We don't like the word understanding, but we'll get to that later. Gives you a clear comprehension of, like a knowing of what these actual actions that you are going to be encouraged to do throughout your life and what they actually cause. So we're going to talk about cause and effect. Now, if you take something that does not belong to you and you haven't been given the right of use of it, think of it like a car, for example. So your mum and dad have got a car, and if you were to go now and take it without their consent and drive it, you've heard of the joyriders going and doing these kind of things, you would be charged with twocking, with taking without consent. Now, something that you would think is yours, which is your name, for example, is, and you pick it up and use it, you are actually taking without consent that name. Yes, it's been given to you by your parents, but something happened when you were between 0 and 42 days old. What happened is that the government wrote a letter to your mum and dad, and they said that they need to go and register you in their system that's registered that you were born. Now, when they registered that you were born and they went down to the registrar's office, what they were actually doing, which they weren't told, which is rather naughty of the system, is that when they registered your being born to them, it created a contract between you and the Crown Corporation, and that's why you've got a piece of paper called a birth certificate, which has got the C with a little circle around it and the copyright symbol of Crown Corporation. You'll see on your birth certificate yourself that the name is written in boxes, and you'll see that the last name, the surname, is in capital letters. Now, for a lot of people, capitalism means many things, and it's up to people to define what capitalism. It's up to people to define for themselves what these things mean. However, what we can show you and what we can demonstrate to you in truth is that if you do not use that capitalized version of your given name, the contract that it would create if you did fails to exist. And because that contract fails to exist, then you are not under any obligation of any performance. So that means that you are free from being subject to acts and statutes which are legislation written by corporate states, which would have you believe that you actually are something that you're not. And these are the things that we want to help you put together in your mind to help you from being unconsciously, so you don't know that you're actually doing these things. Even your parents didn't know that that's what they were doing when they went to register you. So these contracts that have been created are unconsenting, unconscious contracts. And for a contract to be valid, there has to be 5 things. Now, the first thing is disclosure. First, I have to tell you everything that I am getting you to agree to. If I don't disclose something to you, then you can't take the step 2, which is to consider something fully, because I have kept something hidden from you. So you can't accept something that you haven't fully considered. So we need full disclosure in order for you to be able to consider something that I'm suggesting to you, in order for you to be able to then accept it or decline. And there also has to be a mutual benefit. There has to be something good in there, in the agreement between myself and you, or you and somebody else. And therefore there has to be a meeting of the minds. We both have to agree that those things, the acceptance, the consideration, the disclosure and the mutual benefit, is something that you want to say yes to. This is all together makes your consent. What are you actually agreeing to? Now, if I don't tell you something in relation to the agreement and I keep it secret, then the whole contract or the agreement that we've entered into is fraud. Now, if we think about that for just a few moments, if your friend said to you, look, I'll give you this if you change if you change my tire on my bike, I'll give you a Superman sticker. And you changed the tire on his bike and he didn't give you a Superman sticker, then that would have been breach of the agreement. He's breached his agreement with you. And that's quite a simple thing. But you've entered into that agreement knowingly. He's told you exactly what it is that you'll be getting, and he broke his agreement. So we're talking about honour. So he dishonoured his share of his part of the agreement with you, and you know not to trust him next time. So you won't go and help him change his tyre again, will you? Until at least he's given you the Superman sticker from the first time round. Now, what we want you to do now is scale that little trade, that little exchange up to the point where you are going now to use your name. And you pick up the name and you say, that's me, last name, blah, 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 first name, blah, blah, blah. Because you've been told that that's what your name is. Now, here's a question for you. Who told you that? Who told you that your name was that? Okay, it was your mum and dad. And where did your mum and dad get told that that was their name to give to you? They got told that from their mum and dad. And so on and so on and so on, all the way back through your family tree, where nobody was actually told that the capitalized form of that name that you've all been sharing isn't actually yours. It's copyrighted. It's the same as saying, my name is Nike, or my name is McDonald's, or my name is Disney, or Mickey Mouse. All of these are copyrighted titles. And this happened a long time ago in 1666, when they had the fire of London, and they set fire to London, and they took all of the land and said nobody knows who owns what now because nothing was written down. So we're going to give this little bit here to the baker, to Mr. Butcher, to Mr. Shoesmith, to Mr. Blacksmith, to Mr. Cartwright, to Mr. Wheelwright. And so what happened is that people became their trade. So their names became the definition of the occupation that they did in order for them to make money. What happened in the background that these people weren't made aware of is that their whole lives became commercial. They became their business. So instead of them just having a private life and having an occupation in order for them to be able to interact with the monetary system, their whole existence became what it was they did for a living. So their job defined them literally. Mr. Taylor, for example, stitching the clothes, making the clothes, became Mr. Taylor. That was it. He lost all of his private definitions, and he just became defined by the thing that made him money. So when that happened, they brought into legislation, they wrote a piece of paper, just a group of men sitting around a table who declared themselves as the authors, as the authority, and they wrote this piece of paper called the Sesquitervie Act of 1666. And this goes much further back to 1302 with Pope Boniface, who created a trust, and they sat around their table and they said, right, God said to the Vatican, to the Catholic Church, that we are the trustees of the planet Earth, and that God has given us the right to hold planet Earth and all its resources in trust for the people who are Christians. Now at that time, and before that time, there's many other beliefs of many other ways of life and many other tribes and the way that they interacted with one another. And anybody who wasn't converted to Christianity was considered pagan. And there is a rather horrible story of the history of the Templar Knights, which has been blown up into some kind of amazing fantasy with all the terrorism written out of what actually was a mass holocaust of all of the people who didn't believe in this belief that God had given a group of men sitting in Rome the right to claim the world and its resources as theirs. So there was a rather large fight ensued across the world, where the Templar Knights, wearing the Red Cross, funded by the Rothschilds, Moneylenders of Venice, supporting the Vatican, went across Europe and the rest of the world, killing everybody who would not believe in their Roman Catholic and Christian mindset. So there's plenty of history out there, in its watered down version, of course, proclaiming the Templar Knights as the heroes of the day, when in fact they were the biggest murderers and terrorists of the time. The people who believed in nature as opposed to the monetary system were branded witches. The women who had all of this knowledge that had been passed down throughout the ages, given to them, handed down, taught to them about the benefits that the earth gave freely to the people to heal themselves with, for natural remedies, for being able to produce building materials, for example. Nobody has got a right to intercept you and your source energy. So what happened is that we allowed, under great duress and not without a lot of fights, the people put up resistance to this kind of mindset. But the fear that was indoctrinated into the people was so great that it became people became too fearful of even questioning the actual truth about whether it is okay that a group of people can just come along and claim something that they never had a right to claim in the first place. So at the moment, even now, you'll have heard Mum and Dad talking about, having to pay for their water. We can't afford to go on holiday this year, for example, because we've got all these bills to pay. So when you actually look at who is it who can charge you for something that was given freely to you by the universe, by God, by the Creator, by whoever it is that you feel connected to, it definitely wasn't given to you by the Catholic Church, and it definitely wasn't given to you by the Rothschilds. It was given to you by something indefinable that we have no idea really is the truth as to who we are, where we came from, and what we're really doing here. That's for us to define, and we can't do those things or be those things if we're living a lie, if we are operating within the mindset of a debt slave, which is the poem that I read to you at the beginning of this little seminar. If we don't get rid of that mindset that has been projected onto us, then history is set to repeat itself in such a way that your resources are going to be further contaminated, more so than they are now. You are going to be enslaved through a microchip, and your resources will be held ransom to you if you haven't performed in a way that this system requires you to perform in, which is to feed your energy into that system with your belief to help them to create the reality as you see around you. So going back just a little bit now to the part where, not too recently, we were walking down the street and there's people in the street and they're living in the street while you're listening to Mum and Dad talking about the fact that you can't go on holiday this year because they haven't earned enough slave tokens, money, we call those slave tokens. They haven't earned enough of those to pay the electricity or the gas or the water or the mortgage, and all of those things have been coming first. So where are you in the middle of all of that? Well, you're sent to school to be moulded into a very good debt slave, to replace Mum and Dad when they get to be too old or too sick to carry on slaving for this slave system that we need to break the mould from. So in there, you're normally sitting in the school being taught this watered down version of the truth, with the Rothschilds and the Queen of England and the Vatican being heralded as the the explorers and the people who discovered all of this planet, and who went and stuck a flag in it or drew a line around it and claimed it as theirs. Now, some poignant questions for you to just ponder on for this section are: who am I buying my water from? Where did they get the water from? Who gave them the right to sell you back the water? And where was their authority? Where is the contract between God, or the creator of the water, and the people who were selling it to you and your family? Now, if we just pay a little bit of attention to those questions, and this would be very good research for you to start off with, is a few questions really. What's the difference now between being a debt slave in 1738 and 2020? Not a lot, unfortunately. And the stress and the anxiety that your parents, that your mum and dad, that you'll have seen them living through, is all because of the amount of pressure that's applied to them on a monthly basis to be able to keep a roof over your head and food in your tummy. So that's not really a life that you came here to live. It's a corruption of your source and your resources, where it's been sold back to you and your family. And we want to help you to remove the mindset that only benefits the system, that requires you to be enslaved in such a way to it. So I'm going to ask the hosts of these sessions now to just sit with you for a few minutes and have a look through the birth certificate and what you think your name is, where did you get it from, what it means to you, and what your rights are. We're going to go then into the next stage, which is what that birth certificate represents, and then we're going to be able to explain a little bit further as to what it is that you can do about changing this. Thank you, Tinker.